Welcome to this season's edition of Fashion Film Review. I'm here with the head of Fashion Film from SHOWstudio, Sam. We're going to look at a few of the films that we selected from all the films we got sent. So Sam and I have been through every film that has come into SHOWstudio this season, and we've given them a long and hard consideration, and we've chosen these as our ones that we think we want to sort of really showcase and look at. So Sam, should we start with the first film?
I think the first one we've got here is from Emilia and Paulina, and the film is called Roots. This was one of the more difficult ones for me that we selected. Let me start with the positives. I think the cinematography on the whole was pretty good, nice different camera angles, very smooth camera, which is always quite hard when you're exploring lots of movement. Mm-hmm. We didn't see it in the clip that we actually just watched there, but a bit later in the film, we start to see abstract imagery.
There you go.
For example, water, birds, and then it gets a little bit weird for me where we start to see her peeling vegetables, I think. I kind of felt it was trying to be weird without any context for why it was entering that world, and so probably the concept just didn't feel developed enough for me, and you know, maybe trying to be interesting rather than actually being interesting. What about you?
Well, it's probably worth us just saying to the audience that we come from slightly different backgrounds. So I come from fashion photography, and Sam comes from film editing and filming. Is that correct? So we look at things in slightly different ways. I think what you're saying is fair, and I understand why you're saying it, because there's things that I didn't notice, because they're not the immediate things I'm looking for. I'm looking, in essence, to see whether this film takes you through. There's a lot of fashion films, and this one isn't particularly long, it's a couple of minutes or something like that. But you kind of go, for me, the soundtrack helped me go through it. And we talked so much about how fashion films need a great soundtrack, because 2 minutes with the wrong soundtrack can feel like hours, well, a long time, and with the right soundtrack can go like that. And I like the driving beat of the soundtrack, which I'm sure some cinematographers, and maybe in this case the people who made this film, I feel, well, that's just a small part of it. I actually really want them to consider the visual element and the acting or the fashion or style, whatever it is. But for me, it's such an important part of a fashion film, that speed of delivery. When we went from fashion photography in magazines to fashion film, we started to ask a lot more of our audience.
Yeah.
There's a lot more, we are asking them to consider things for longer. We're asking them to devote more space to it in their day. If you have a fashion magazine, you flick through, it's literally a very casual, it's like scrolling on Instagram. It's that sort of level of kind of commitment to it. If you're showing somebody a 2-minute fashion film, in my opinion, you need to be able to get them through it in quite a speedy kind of way. That's what makes it very different from conventional film. Yeah. So first of all, I found myself quite able to watch it. It was good, sort of got me through it with quite good energy to it. I like the swagger in the girls. Yeah. I thought they looked good, a good swagger, a good walk. And I thought they both looked, I think there's two of them, they both look really, really pretty. I like the situation. I don't know where it's set, but I got the feeling it might be sort of somewhere like Romania or Ukraine or somewhere like that. So I kind of like the place. Yeah. And I just thought it had a bit of a kind of mood to it. If I was flicking through a copy of Vogue back in the day, I think this is quite a nice editorial. You know, the girls look great, the clothes look good, the photography is mastered, it's all fine. But when we look at fashion film, we're asking a lot more of it than that. Yeah. So I think that's where it probably falls down to you. Yeah.
No, I think there's a lot of positives in it, a lot of positives. And it probably goes back to what I said to you just off camera, that film, and probably all art forms, but film especially for me is this imperfect medium. There are so many different things at play with a still or a photograph. You're dealing with one frame. Yeah. When you've got to do that for 25 frames a second and to create essentially a perfect image over and over again, it's a big task. So I think there's a lot of positives here, and the filmmaker should just look to keep, pushing and developing their skills to make an even better fashion film next time.
Great. All right.
Shall we see what the next one
Yes, please.
holds? I liked this film.
Yep.
Again, there's not masses of fashion in it.
No.
There's only 1 or 2 shots that fully reveal what the model is wearing. I do think what she's wearing is interesting. It's, you know, exposing. It feels almost like she has been shot in a way.
Yeah.
And I like this interplay between, you know, the talking about the capabilities of a camera or the actual act of shooting. What does that actually mean? Because in many ways there is not masses of difference between shooting a rifle and shooting film.
Well, it's a tricky thing. I've been caught out on it before without concentrating when somebody says to you what to do. Oh, I shoot women, and it's like, well, I don't shoot when I photograph women. But it's a bad piece of language that we use. Yeah. The whole idea.
It's violent language.
It is violent language, and it comes across quite well in this piece. I liked its fetishization of the act of taking pictures, and it does lean towards the sort of violent. I mean, obviously, clearly the filmmaker's totally aware of that. She's put almost the sound of gunshots going off and the cross being like the sights of a gun. So it is obviously playing up to that, and it is in that way quite interestingly perverse, because it has this sort of fetishization of the act of filmmaking and photography, and it quite interestingly blurs photography and film. So I think it's on a Hasselblad first of all.
Yes.
A little of the kind of, you know, the diaphragm, whatever it is, opening and shutting, and all that. And of course, a lot of photographers, probably the same with filmmakers, but a lot of photographers are into their equipment.
Yeah.
A lot of photographers, I would guess, are kind of quite, they like
into it. Yeah,
into the actual machine, into the metal, into the glass, into the little click, 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 clicks, all of that sort of stuff.
It kind of reminded me in a very distant way of Helmut Newton's work.
Yeah, well, it's fetish.
It's fetish, it's really quite sexy, but it's also flirting with violence, almost like, you know, The Woman in the Crocodile.
Yeah. I was just trying to see if I could find a Newton book to hand, which I can't. But yeah, there is that. But that's that fetish thing. He was somebody who was obsessing around sexuality. So that comes through very strongly in his work. And it is that clicky. And it's again, any obsession, any fetish becomes a sort of absolute glorification of that particular thing, whether it's a hair fetish or a shoe fetish or whatever it is. You know, that's for a fetishist, that's their world, and they love every part of it. That's why you get these things where he's clicking the camera open. This way it feels as if it's somebody's fetish. And I think it is. You talk to a lot of photographers, they talk about the equipment a lot. I mean, that's fine, with respect. It's not my cup of tea. I've never been a photographer who loves his equipment. It's a means to an end for me. It does what it's supposed to do, and that's it. I don't know how it works, but I don't want to sort of spend too much time with it. But some people really love it. And I try to understand that, and I look at it. And if you get into using a certain sort of camera, like a lot of great photographers have used Leicas. Leica's kind of the camera. It's not the easiest camera to use. I mean, obviously, it's once you get going with it, but it's not the easiest camera to start to get to work with. But there is that sort of concentration of that, and you think, stop looking at your bloody camera and look at your subject.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about your camera. I got into a lot of trouble on social media when I first started using my iPhone. I'm sure I told you that, as a camera, because I couldn't quite work out why the intensity of the vitriolic, but it was because for a lot of those photographers, they were their equipment. So if I was a professional photographer, I had professional equipment, and that put me above the amateur photographer.
Yeah.
As soon as you get any Tom, Dick or Harry using one of these, it takes away from that position. It's totally understandable. I'm not knocking that. That's their livelihood in a way. Yeah. And so, you know, all those guys who'd invested heavily into kind of, you know, all the bronze-colored kits and all the kind of Hasselblad and everything else, all of a sudden being upstaged by these things, which isn't a nice feeling, especially if you're so used to that, and this doesn't give you quite the same quality, or doesn't quite, you know, and certainly you ask somebody to come to their picture taken and you've got one of these, it's physically less impressive.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very like giving somebody a ballpoint pen and then asking them to kind of, write you a novel. It just doesn't feel like you want a kind of fountain pen or a typewriter or something. The machinery actually sort of reinforces the talent. I think it was in part, largely in part, due to that. It's quieting down now. I don't get so much vitriol because I use one of these. So anyway, back to the film. You liked it. I liked it. It could have, in my opinion, the ending was a bit not what it should have been. If you're going to do that fetishization of the technique of taking a picture or technique of making a film, you need the rest to be amazing.
Cool.
Next one.
Next we have Elizabeth with 5 to 9.
Pomegranates are becoming a thing now. In my list of kind of cliched things in fashion film, along with mirroring and vegetation stroking and voiceovers, pomegranates seem to be making an appearance there, coming in at number 8.
Tell me about this film. What did you like about it? What stuck out to you?
Well, first of all, I wasn't that keen on it. I've seen it a lot, where there's a group of young kids in a field or somewhere other dressed up in kind of slightly inappropriate clothing to be in a field. I just thought, oh, it's that again. No, I did it. I went through my old work from my college work the other day, so I was doing some archiving, and I had exactly that shoot. I had my mates on a field dressed in weird clothing. So we all do it because our friends are most accessible. There's probably some young designer we know or somebody who's got a big talent for making clothes out of nothing. So everybody goes down to the local, whatever it is, field, lake, whatever, and shoots their friends all marching around. I felt there was a bit of that in this, but then as it went on, I thought, well, actually the clothes are very coherent, and what we're seeing here is at this point in the film, I actually thought, well, this is like a fashion show. What I'm actually presenting is a whole collection here. Yeah. So it's more than just an individual outfit, and they do this lineup at the end here on a tractor, and it's actually a very convincing way of showing a fashion collection.
It's almost like a catwalk film.
Yeah.
I didn't love the narrative aspects to it. It goes a little bit, it's got a bit of a Lord of the Flies, Mad Maxy kind of quality dystopian feel, which I don't love. But I do like how all the fashion is really visible. If we're going to go back to the previous film, Shoot, look at how the model is acting. She's very static. We don't really see the garment in a way that what a photograph could do. No. So this is good because we see the relationship between nature, between movement and the clothes. So yeah, liked it for that reason. It was way too long for me. I mean, a fashion film can be any length, but I think often it works better shorter. Yeah. You want to keep someone really interested, almost you want them to rewind it. I think there's also two fundamental differences in between fashion photography and film directing or filmmaking. Yeah. Fashion photography leaves you wanting more. When you look at an image, you look at it for the length of time you want, and then you look away. Yeah. Film, and especially recently, in the last 10 years, you've seen big film directors making mammoth films, 3-hour films, silence, it's literally someone walking around in the mountains for 3 hours, and it's like this very indulgent thing. In a way, it's complete opposite to fashion photography, which is you're there just looking at it for a split second, you repeat, you go back, you're looking at the same image over and over again. Yeah. And I think there's a conflict there. So I think good fashion filmmakers are people that are aware of that and can kind of find a happy medium between the two. It is this, we talked about right at the beginning, this sort of demand of the fashion film audience to devote a lot more time to it, to get any payoff from it. It's what I think turns a lot of people off from fashion film. Yeah. So I thought I just wasted 2 minutes of my life to get to that. But you don't know that when you start watching it. You kind of hope it's going to go somewhere. Yeah. And some are not 2 minutes, they're quite a lot longer.
I think there is a sort of an inherent fault in the medium of fashion film if it is making the audiences feel frustrated most of the time. I can look through a series of fashion photographs and they can be rubbish fashion photographs, but I'm through them really quickly. I get everything I need to know within split seconds.
Yeah.
So I think that's why, in conclusion to what we've been doing for 25 years, I'm really looking at shortening our films down a lot more to try and get them to deliver. And I think, the medium for fashion film seems to be Instagram, seems to be TikTok, etc. That's where people see them, as much as the medium for fashion photography was the magazine. And that's got a quick delivery. Now one can say, oh, well, this is a whole generation who haven't got any attention span. That's not really true. It's more that actually that's the most applicable material in that medium. Yeah. I think, as you say, the bigger problem is a lot of directors who seem unable to edit. It's like, oh, come on, I know it makes sense for you. My life's finite. Age 65 is pretty even more finite. Anyway, back to the film here. There were some nice touches in, there's some nice things in it that I kind of like. This shot of the two guys leaning against was beautiful. I thought it was, in the corner on the outside. I wish it had all visually been at that level. Yeah. I think that was a nice moment in it. But it might be an idea for the director and editor who made this, is try, what is it now, 2 minutes long?
It's 4.
It's a 4 minute long film. Try and get it down to 10 seconds.
So I think that's maybe a good place to leave this film.
Yep, be brutal. See what happens. You can, you can hate it. You can add another 5 seconds on.
But this one was a film called Feral Muse.
This is a series of 3.
Submit 3.
Right.
Three films here. There's definite coherence between all three. So the filmmaker definitely has a language that they're looking to explore, probably understands themselves as an artist maybe quite well. I do think, to build on our comments on the previous film with 5 to 9, what we encounter a lot in filmmaking that we don't see in fashion photography is that in order to make a film coherent or flow, you sometimes get to this dilemma where you have to use filler shots, and that might be a sacrifice because the image might not be the strongest image, but it may allow you to transition to a new place. And now that's quite a common problem that we see. For me, Feral Muse included a few of those shots. To just remove them, reduce the length would have been the better option. I personally don't think you have to use those filler shots in fashion film. You have the liberty to jump around more erratically, but when we're taught film, that's not the way we're inherently taught, so that's probably why we see a lot of it.
So when you're told to insert filler shots, whose purpose is to get from one scene to another?
I think when we're taught film in a more traditional way in terms of narrative, and even if there is no narrative as such, we're taught about linking shots or moments of pauses, establishing all these things that add context to a greater picture. And so what I think will push fashion film forward is more daring filmmaking where they don't use linking shots, where every shot is photographed like a still.
I was quite taken, this set of films, especially the last one that we looked at just then. And again, it's because of the soundtrack. Well, that's my hook into it. Actually, whilst I was going through the films and looking at them, I put that film on a loop, just repeating, because I like the soundtrack. But it worked for the things that I'm looking for in a fashion film. It felt it made the film accelerate nicely, and kind of you wanted to look at it. And I really believe that thing, that the music is half of the thing. You know, it's not like the 10% you add on top of it and the film is most of it. Actually, the combination is so important. So I was hooked in by the music, especially on this one. And I realized I just kept going to it and putting it on, just while I was doing other things and sending emails and whatever I have to do at the same time. But I was enjoying it. I was enjoying having it on there. But it wasn't just the music, it was also the music and some of the imagery associated with it. I mean, it's a making of film.
Yeah.
There's a photographer here and the filmmaker is working over their shoulder. But it's still got a feeling to it, and all of these, there's that
there's a texture, isn't there? And I think that's a big thing that filmmakers often lack, is exploring the actual texture of film. Because obviously every medium that we use, whether that's our phone or a really high-end camera, generates a different feel, a different quality. And that is so important in relation to the thing you're filming, especially when that thing you're filming is fashion, which is also about that same textural feeling. So when those two things come together, I think you can make a really beautiful piece like this. And this is clearly a beautiful film. I love the grade as well.
So this filmmaker has got a great eye for that. And on top of that, if you look at the scenes, and it's through all three films, there's a fashion photographer, a great fashion photographer. I was just turning around behind me to see if I could see any of her work on hand, but I don't think, yes we have, here we go. Perfect. Deborah Turbeville. She is, was a photographer from the 1970s, and if you look at her work, it's all cut-ups, it's all pictures stuck to other pictures, it's crop-ins, it's all that sort of thing. It looks like the filmmaking here.
It's about texture. It's all about texture. It's almost like you can feel it. It becomes a real 3D medium almost.
And I felt that was a very similar sort of thing. What this film, Deborah Turbeville was a certain sort of woman, and at a certain point in her life, I think she'd been an art director beforehand, so she knew her way a little bit around imagery and medium and the industry. My guessing is Genevieve is younger and perhaps less experienced, and hasn't found the same. But I really am excited to see where she goes with this.
Me too.
I want to try and encourage the people we're looking at to dig deeper in themselves. I find it a bit, and I mean this as constructively and not rudely, a bit shallow emotionally. I want to be disturbed. I want to see some feelings that are disturbing. Part of what makes Deborah Turbeville's work disturbing and therefore memorable is the fact that she can bring her experience of life into it and talk about things which look a lot more interesting and not so shallow emotionally. So I would really encourage Genevieve, if you wanted to do this, you can absolutely, you've got a career in fashion filmmaking, 100%. You just need to push yourself to your limits, to your, what you don't know. The best place to be when you're creating is when you don't know whether it's right or wrong. And there's some frisson, there's some thrill about not knowing whether you're doing something horrendous you should never do, or something brilliant, which is actually what your life's leading towards. But you need to get to that place. If it's safe, if it's easy, that's what it'll be for the viewer as well, safe and easy, because you can't hide that. So I would encourage people to be more devoted to them expressing a deeper range of emotions and a more important range of emotions. Everything you hate, embrace it. Kill off your darlings. Never just re-plow that safe area, never be in that safe space. Always go towards the edges, embrace the things that you are frightened of, embrace things that you hate, embrace the things you reject. That's the only way you'll learn, and you will find more about yourself and more about the world by doing so. Is my potted psychology moment. Next film.
Next, we have a film by Lito Chan.
Allow yourself a few short minutes of intentional reflection. Shift into a comfortable position and welcome my voice. Do you have an insatiable urge to be basic? More and more profile photos orbit back to default, enlightened by the mundane. Uniqueness is small and ever shrinking. Do you understand why?
Michael, have you seen this film? I can't work out whether it's whether she is a metahuman or not. You're like the person out of Blade Runner that comes and spots what the replicants are. Is she a replicant, Michael?
That does look like 3D, yeah.
Very good. I mean, later she looks very Avatar-y, but on that first scene where you see her speaking,
The close-up is really impressive. Isn't
Yeah.
it?
It's 3D, but she's used like a photo, I think, and then painted the photo back on, so you can see where the eyelashes split. So she's kind of like it looks good because it's a photograph rather than like something generated.
Do you want to start with this one, Nick? What do you like about it?
well,
Or dislike?
well, there is a few either way. I liked its. Well, I liked the fact that I was engaged straight away. So is she a avatar or not an avatar? If she's if she's an avatar, it's a very good avatar, and I need some good avatars like that. So I was interested in that. So I was interested in just a technical rendition of a person, but I liked the strange and nothingy, drifty world.
Yeah.
I liked her kind of how empty it was, but it didn't feel depressing. It felt just odd, and it has that kind of interesting contemporary aesthetic with the way the sort of emojis appear around them and then appear as part of the film. The language of contemporary media was very much used with ease and grace within the film.
Yeah.
I didn't like the voiceover because one of my pet hates is voiceovers on film, said the man who just put a voiceover on his film. So but it isn't something that I think, oh, fantastic, he's got a voiceover. But I really did like just the kind of contemporary feel of it. And I didn't mind that it was sort of semi-real, semi-avatar, that the space was a neutral space. None of those things I objected to. I think the only thing I felt it lacked was any interesting fashion.
Yeah, it's not really a fashion film.
No.
It's a good art film. Yeah, nice film.
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, as I say, it doesn't, in the end, if we were being really harsh and critical, it doesn't pay off because there's no fashion in it, which is a shame, you know, but especially if it's an avatar, because then you can take whatever bit of fashion you want. That for me is the thing. I really liked it, but if you're going to go this far, then really, you know, get great fashion there. It's just what you're supposed to. If you want to be a fashion filmmaker, it's what you're supposed to be doing. It's like you can't be a fashion filmmaker if you don't like or want to show fashion. Why bother? Just become a filmmaker. I thought it was, I thought the filmmaking was nice. People looked interesting in it. They were aware of how to make something look beautiful and not just sort of unattractive. So that's a skill in itself. I liked it because it dealt with mental health. And you know, because I've spoken to you about it, and I don't want to go into it in too great a depth, but a lot of the people we work with have mental health issues. A lot of people in life have mental health issues. So I worked for a long time with somebody who would physically cut themselves, and it's sort of something that the generation of people that I've seen my children grow up amongst, that seems to be much more exaggerated than when I grew up. When I grew up, I didn't know anybody who self-harmed, you know, there was no mental health issues, etc. Of course, they were all there. Nothing's different, people are the same. But it was all covered up. So now this sort of liberation of people being able to speak about their feelings, which I think can be nothing other than beneficial, I think it's really important. We live in slightly worrying times in the general sort of looking forward. I mean, I think we've always been in slightly worrying times, but I think it feels very much now with the climate and with politics and all that sort of stuff that it feels a little bit threatening. And I think you've got a generation of people who do feel worried and concerned, threatened. It makes it of the moment. If you did this in the 1960s, it would be not right. You say, well, people aren't like that. But this is actually what is on a lot of young people's minds and a lot of young people are thinking about. It's very interesting, and I've noticed through studying the history of fashion photography, it's a very, very good way of understanding the culture and the society of that time. Because we express ourselves in fashion, we express our desires, which is actually a very good indicator of who we are. Who we want to be is a very good indicator of who we are. It isn't a fashion film in the sense they're not wearing Raf Simons and it's kind of, you know, really sort of pushing the kind of, you know, any particular fashion brand or anything like that. It's not shot in that way, it doesn't have the visual language of fashion. but it does have something of the moment. That was the reason I wanted to show it to you.
Great.
Good. I picked this film for a couple of reasons. One was there's quite a lot of people who do expressive dance now.
Yeah.
And you see that. I followed 2 or 3 people on Instagram and we modelled with them. We had asked them to model for us, and I will continue to do that because I think this sort of harnessing sort of freeform movement as a way of sort of, it's not ballet and it's not dancing, it's just sort of feeling the moment and feeling the power, the energy or whatever it is. I think it's quite current and interesting in that, and I felt the soundtrack was good. I felt it was a good, powerful soundtrack, and I kind of liked how she looked, I liked how she moved. I think the editing, even on the negative side, I think the editing needed to be a bit sharper. It's a bit off on the editing in terms of the sound.
I do think though the camera work is great.
Yeah.
I really like the organic quality.
Yeah.
It's quite documentary almost. This shot for me was great, especially if I just play it quickly with sound.
So nice.
And then the sound comes back in, and I think that's really nice because it acknowledges this fantasy,
Yeah.
but then breaks it,
Yeah.
like what the bystander on the street would see. So that, in many respects, that's actually quite a good edit. The rest of the film, it could have been, again, a bit shorter. The pacing could have been upped. I wanted to feel a bit more of that punk energy in the edit.
Yeah, I think it's in a way, it's a good film in terms of its sort of directness, and it's there's 2 or 3 interesting ways of delivering the whole film to you. The soundtrack's one, her movement's another one, the editing at certain moments is another one. The clothing I think is fine. It's a piece of clothing. If your job is to sell people that piece of clothing, that sort of works.
Yeah.
I kind of like some of the interactions. I like the central model, and
I think it also shows that filmmakers should use, their limitations to their advantage.
Yeah.
You don't need an overly complex idea with loads of like weird abstract shots of orange peel and all of that. Sometimes, if you've got a mate who can dance and you've got some access to fashion, maybe that's it.
Yeah.
So maybe that brings us on to our last one today.
Okay.
Which was sent to us by someone called Santiago, who's part of a collective called Art Camp, and this is
The brand Telfar.
My name is Aya. I'm from Brooklyn. Brooklyn. Yay! Make some noise for Brooklyn!
The Running Man is a cool dance if you're in a party and you're still getting to know people. So if you're trying to just break the ice at a party, I advise doing the Running Man, or maybe the Jogging Man, which is the new version. But if you
New version. Yo, puff him up real quick.
We both really like this.
really liked this. I thought it was really clever use of technology. And if we're talking about fashion, it is literally just the fashion.
Pure fashion, yeah.
So much so that they've removed the actors from the footage. So they've used the technique called mocap, which I'm sure most people are quite familiar with, which they do actually kind of cheekily show in the short advert.
All right, with an actual film from mocap session.
There is a tiny frame there.
Yeah.
Art Camp also sent us a little clip of behind the scenes as well. But yeah, I really like this. It was cheeky, full of energy. You can see why it would do well on social media. It kind of appeals across the board. It's like artistically interesting and very accessible. I also loved the, I know we both talk about how much we dislike voiceover, but I thought the voiceover was actually quite clever.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because the voiceover isn't just a narration, it's almost acts as music.
Mm-hmm.
It's got rhythm to it and pace, and it changes, and it's very kinetic, goes with the movement. It almost feels like it's then edited to the voiceover, which gives it that same pace of music.
Yeah.
So yeah, big fan.
Yeah, well, same here. I mean, Telfar's a great brand, so the clothes are great, and you know, this whole sort of removing the faces, the hands, and the legs and everything, or not including them. But also, I love the voices.
Yeah.
I love the fact they have that kind of New York sort of, I can't think of the right way to describe it, but that sort of slang New York kind of thing, and they're kind of cool, and they're funny, and they're disrespectful, and they're all those sorts of things.
Power Puff! Puffin' stuff! Puffin' the Magic Dragon! So, like I'm saying, I need some weed.
I thought it was great. I mean, it was a sort of, you know, one of the best fashion films I've seen. So, and I think it plays with space, it plays with the whole idea of movement. You know, the clothes are central to it, because as you say, there's nothing else in the film. Even the bags are a part of it, you know, and they make the bags work, and they make it about the bags, they make it about the clothes. I think it's very, very, very close to being a great, great fashion film, because it's all you need. So it's good. I'm very, very pleased to see it and very entertained by it, and it was a pleasure to watch. What you asked for, you know.
Great one to end on, really.
Yeah, perfect. Lovely. So that's it this season from Sam and from myself. Please keep sending your films in. We love to see them, and we will try to write back to you and express our comments, whether you get on the end selection or not. So thank you very much. See you on the next episode.